Hello and welcome to this edition of the Collaborative Corner podcast. Collaborative Corner is a production of the Fort Wayne Media Collaborative with the goal of connecting listeners to the stories and culture of Northeast Indiana. Thank you for joining us for this edition. I'm 89.1 WBOI Program Director Zach Bernard.
And I'm Brianna Barrow, Digital Media Coordinator for the Fort Wayne Media Collaborative. Through this podcast, we want to bring you the full context of our region, with each episode by speaking to notable people in local entertainment, government, food, you name it.
On this episode, we're talking with the founder of the Fort Wayne Media Collaborative, as well as founder and managing editor of the newsletter The Local, Kara Hackett. Kara, thanks so much for being with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Awesome. So I feel like newsletter kind of oversimplifies what you're doing at The Local. Could you kind of tell readers what they would expect when they head over there?
Yeah, definitely. You know, it's funny because when you say newsletter, like you said, it seems a little dated, maybe even kind of boring. I've had a lot of friends who, when I first told them I was quitting my former job to do a newsletter, they were like, really? Like, why? And they didn't think it would be interesting, but luckily they've all since become subscribers and have had a great time reading it. So you might have seen a lot of national reporters in recent years kind of break off of legacy publications and start like a Substack newsletter, usually based on a very specific area of interest or study. And so the area that I'm looking into is just what's happening in Fort Wayne each week. And that covers local news, local culture, and then spotlighting local businesses. And in the process, we've come along to also partner with some local businesses to bring our subscribers monthly deals as a way to just drive support and interest in what's happening in our local small business scene. So that's the newsletter in a nutshell.
That leads me into my next question, because I'm a big fan of The Local. I follow you guys on Instagram. I've seen some great stuff from you. I was going to ask how it's impacted local businesses or organizations, and like if they felt the impact, or if, you know, has anyone like said anything to you about that, or?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's like one of the coolest, most exciting things about what I get to do is that we do hear from people who we write stories about or people that we feature in our monthly small business deals with The Local. So we do partner with restaurants sometimes to do like, you know, a free coffee or a free food item at the restaurant that month for all of our paid subscribers. Our subscription rate is $6 a month. So if you subscribe to The Local for $6 a month, you then gain access to our monthly deals that we do with local small businesses, and they usually even out to be about $6. So it's a really cool way of kind of making the news available for free, but also getting citizens to pay for the news. And that's a little bit of a sidetrack, just to say that a lot of the small businesses we've spotlighted or just featured in stories in general have really come back to us and said, wow, you know, we did have a lot of people come in that week, and people who had never heard of us before were checking out what we did. They've asked people, you know, when they came in, how did you hear about us? And they said they found out about them through The Local, which I think is so exciting that, you know, we get this opportunity to share what so many people are doing in our local small business scene, but also just in our local community in general to make Fort Wayne a better place.
When taking a closer look at your bio, you've spent time in other large cities like Detroit and New York. What sets Fort Wayne apart from major cities such as those?
Yeah, that's a really good question. You know, I think that Fort Wayne is the best of all worlds in some ways, because it's big enough that there's a lot going on, and there's, as you guys know, plenty to report on each week. It's usually just making decisions on what you're going to cover. But it's also kind of small enough and insular enough that you can really get your head around like some of the key issues that are happening in our community. And it feels almost like everyone's having the same conversation. You know, I had this talk with my husband because we visit a lot of cities. I've lived in New York and I've lived in Indianapolis. My previous employer worked in Detroit, and so I did spend a good amount of time there as well, as you noted. But we were talking a little bit about how Fort Wayne almost does feel like New York in some ways, because when you live in New York and when you're keeping up with, you know, the news or the social scene, there's kind of like a sense that everyone on the island is talking about the same thing. So maybe not New York State, but New York City. There's kind of like, you know, key restaurants that are opening up and things that are happening that you can pretty much say, like, it feels like everyone in New York is talking about the same stuff. Whereas even when you go to a city like Chicago, that's technically smaller than like a New York, or a Detroit that does have so many suburbs, there's so many different elements of things that people are talking about within the community. It's really hard to have one newsletter or one, beat that could potentially cover, even dip its toes into everything that's going on. But the cool thing about Fort Wayne is that it does kind of have that same insular vibe, I think, in some ways that New York has, where it does seem like, each week there's a big talking point that a lot of people are really interested in hearing about. And so that's really what we kind of try to focus on with the local, and just skim down a lot of the key points that, if you're only going to read a couple things this week, these are the key stories we think you should pay attention to.
Yeah, I think it's a huge benefit to have your newsletter in the fort, because I found out about events, and I know it's benefited some local businesses. And I remember reading an article from the local back in July that you did about how buses are the future transit of the city in Fort Wayne. And so I was just wondering, in addition to public transportation, I'd like to hear your thoughts on any other things that you think would improve the livability of Fort Wayne.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think buses are an interesting one because in some ways, it doesn't seem like it would be the best option for transit. It's definitely not the sexiest or the most exciting option out there when you think about the wide range of potential of the future of transit. We're talking self-driving cars or light rail. All of those, in my mind, just as a consumer, seem a lot more attractive. But what's interesting about buses is that a lot of cities, including Fort Wayne, are probably most set up already to adapt to making them a better form of public transit. And they're also a highly inclusive form of public transit. And so if you are looking to increase, public transit in Fort Wayne, I do think that buses are something we should be paying attention to. So when we're talking about other key issues that we're following right now, obviously it's election season. There's a lot going on with local elections that we want to keep our readers informed about. I think it's incredibly difficult to find information about candidates in Fort Wayne, which it doesn't seem like it should be. And so we just want to help people identify, where do these candidates stand and what can we prepare them for at the elections this fall. But another thing that we're seeing, I think, as a hot topic is obviously housing. That's been a huge issue with the Fort Wayne Media Collaborative as well. This year, the collaborative's covering housing, evictions, and neighborhoods. And those are really the key areas that we focus on with the local as well, because they do touch on so many things. I mean, just a couple weeks ago, we saw so much happening around a Domo development announcing a huge proposal for Fort Wayne's riverfront, which obviously affects a lot of housing in the area. And so we've been looking into that in recent weeks, and also just riverfront development in general, so as the city's downtown development extends toward the Wells Street and High Street area on North River, there's a lot of interesting conversations to be had, I think, there about property acquisitions and housing and retail development, and just how do you support development in a community? Obviously, we all want to see, our community grow and continue to reap the benefits of good development, but also how do you do that in a way that doesn't gentrify communities or displace people who have lived there for a long time and really built their businesses or built their lives there. So those are key stories that we're following, and we really rely on neighbors actually a lot, and neighborhood associations, to kind of clue us into what we should be covering. I try to keep up with as many local neighborhood presidents as I can, and just kind of ask them, what are some key issues that you guys are seeing in your neighborhood right now? And a lot of times that leads to the most, I think, interesting and productive stories that apply not only to that neighborhood, but also to neighborhoods across the community, because what you tend to see as a reporter is things that are happening and a challenge in one space or one neighborhood are also a challenge in another neighborhood, and maybe it looks a little bit different there. But a lot of people are dealing with some of the same issues. The same things that are challenging about expanding development in the Wells and High Street area are also challenging about, the South Side and development that we're seeing around electric works. And so I think it's important to kind of have those conversations and highlight what neighbors are doing in each area to mitigate the effects of displacement and to help keep people housed, and to provide more housing stock. And hopefully, we can kind of cross-pollinate and apply those lessons in different places.
Kara, before we go, is there anything else you'd like to say about the local?
I would just hope that people would check it out and give us a chance. There is a free subscription, so if you just want to see what it's all about, please subscribe to our free newsletter. It's once a week. We aren't going to spam you with constant emails. It's just kind of a quick rundown of what's going on in the city each week. And if you like that and you want more, we'd encourage you to subscribe for $6 a month. It's only me and my husband doing this, so it really is a small business in and of itself to provide news for the community. And so we really hope that people will check it out and support it, and we can be doing more independent journalism, because if we get more subscribers, then we can do more stories.
All right, well, thank you very much, Kara, for joining us for this edition of the Collaborative Corner podcast. And we'd also like to thank Fort Wayne Media Collaborative Project Manager Dave Gong for helping to coordinate this today.
Also, thanks to the college TV staff here at Purdue University Fort Wayne at the Center for Collaborative Media. If you're interested in more content from the Fort Wayne Media Collaborative, you can visit fwmediacollaborative.com.
Until next time, I'm 89.1 WBOI Program Director Zach Bernard.
And I'm Brianna Barrow. Thank you for listening.